Okay, welcome everyone to our September Kriya Yoga Sunday service. I know it seems a little soon since the last one, but due to our retreat schedule, this is the way we had to work it out. So I'm glad you could be here again today. We're going to talk about the power of divine knowledge to provide ultimate protection. And that's a lofty title, but I think that we'll be able to discuss it in a way that'll help you understand it. Again, the idea is we're going to explore how cultivating divine knowledge provides the ultimate protection in life. A few weeks ago, I was in Ireland and we did a Kriya initiation ceremony there for the participants. And then next week, we'll be in Pittsburgh for the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship students. And we'll also be doing another initiation on Thursday. And when people go through the initiation process, they're often familiar with the idea that once you begin practicing Kriya Yoga, once you step on the path, that God or the divine takes 50% of your karma, and then the guru resolves 25% of your karma, and then you have 25% left to work out. It's usually some kind of ratio or fraction in that way. But what does that mean? Well, we can look at it from a mystical standpoint, which means that we don't really know what it means, but we're just going to trust it and go with it. Or we can look at it from a little bit more of a rational standpoint, which I think can be more helpful for us. So when you begin practicing Kriya Yoga, and really when you begin any sincere spiritual path, immediately the amount of karma that you're going to be involved in is going to diminish. And that's because the purpose of Kriya Yoga and the purpose of a spiritual path is to release you from involvement with karma. So many people, as you might know, they go through life and one thing after another happens to them. And they're always wondering, well, why is this happening? Now, why does it change to this? Now, why am I having this experience? It's like they're caught up in a whirlwind of confusion, or as Mr. Davis might say, a whirlwind of delusion or illusion. And that's how many people live their lives. And usually they don't have an anchor. They're not anchored in something like spirit, or they're not devoted to something greater than their small sense of self. And when we begin practicing Kriya Yoga, when we begin our spiritual path, we are immediately affirming that we're redirecting our awareness from the confusion, the Maya, the illusion of life, and we're aiming to pull our awareness within to experience wholeness, well-being, the infinite consciousness, the infinite spirit that we are. So anytime a person begins the spiritual path, they are automatically negating probably even more than 50% of karma that's possible for them, because they're starting to dig up the root of what keeps them involved in the wheel of samsara, or the wheel of repetitive experience. There was a student that I've known for a very long time. He actually was able to be at Center for Spiritual Awareness when Mr. Davis was still alive, when we were doing the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship program, the very first retreat that I led there for that program. He was able to attend that, and he was able to meet Mr. Davis. So that's fortunate. But he'd been traveling a bit lately, and I had messaged him and asked him how he was doing. And he said, I'm playing something like, I'm playing around with Maya. And as soon as he told me that, what popped into my mind was, well, that's a dangerous thing. That's a dangerous thing, because when you start playing around with illusion, with delusion, it's very easy to, before you know it, get lost. And the whole purpose of the spiritual path is to kind of bring us away from wandering in, again, this cycle of samsara, this cycle of repetitive experience. So back to the original idea of when you begin practicing Kriya Yoga, when you go through the initiation process, they say that God the divine takes care of 50% of your karma. The guru takes care of 25%, and you've got 25% to work out. Well, again, when you begin practicing Kriya Yoga, you are automatically, or at least you should be if you're not, you're automatically affirming that the most important way to live is the way of the yamas and niyamas, practicing harmlessness, truthfulness, non-possessiveness, contentment, surrender in God, and so on. You know them. I'm not going to go through and list them all or discuss them in our time together today. But you are affirming that that is the most important way to live. And if you are sincere and seriously engaging the practice, then you have undertaken what Patanjali calls the great vow, which are the yamas and niyamas. And by undertaking that great vow, now you are making choices in your life which are pointing you in the direction of wholeness, which means you are automatically ignoring, avoiding, resolving, cutting out all the confusion, all the stuff that mires you up in expecting the world of change to be permanent, all the stuff that mires you up in avidya or ignorance. So just by doing that, that is one way that 50% of your karma can be resolved right now. The 25% with the guru or the teacher, well, when you have access to someone who is, as Mr. Davis would say, at least sincere and knowledgeable, which means they know what they know and they also know what they don't know. So they're not going to make stuff up or mislead you. When you have access to someone who has experience on the spiritual path, then now when you're having difficulty, when the yamas and niyamas aren't enough, well, you can go to them and you can speak to them, talk to them, ask, well, in your life, what did you do? If the spiritual path is the most important thing for me, from your experience, what would be the best way to go? What would be the best choice to make to continue my forward momentum? And in that regard, if again you are sincere and you have respect for the tradition and the teacher, you are automatically going to cut out probably another 25% of the mistakes you could possibly make. And I think this is one of the sad things about our culture, or at least the culture that I'm aware of, is that there's often not enough emphasis put towards benefiting from the knowledge of our elders or the knowledge of people that can actually help us. You know, I see this with teenagers where, and you probably see this too, where you watch how they're living their life and you think to yourself, my God, if they would just stop doing that. But they say, well, it's my life. And what do they mean? They have to make their own mistakes. And that's fine. And everyone does that. And I remember doing that too. But the same thing is true on the spiritual path. When you have access to a teacher, a sincere teacher, a real teacher who can help, and the teacher gives advice and the person says, well, I don't want to do that. I need to live my own life. I need to make my own mistakes. Well, they're just prolonging difficulty. They're prolonging pain. They're prolonging a sense of suffering. And again, I had this issue sometimes, not very much, because I really listened to Mr. Davis when he talked, but there were a few things where I had that kind of response to. And looking back, I think to myself, I wished I would have just listened, to what he said. And even now, as I go back through his books, the books that he approved, there's he has all kinds of books, but there are only a few that were still in print when he was alive. And when asked about that, why he didn't republish his older books, he said, because the books that I have in print, they more accurately represent my current state of consciousness or my current understanding. And I see that. And when I go back through his books, like The Eternal Way, which we'll get to here in a minute, and The Science of God Realization and Absolute Knowledge and so on, it is so precise. It tells you exactly what you need to do. And that's one way to benefit from someone's wisdom. And to benefit from someone's knowledge. But we have to actually apply it. That's the key. If you got absolute knowledge that liberates consciousness, Mr. Davis's book, which we're going through on Patreon now. I'm posting it the first of every month. We're going through one chapter each month. But if you got that book, and it's just a thin little book, and you read one paragraph or one page, and you ask yourself, what do I need to do? What do I read on this page here that I either don't want to do, or I'm not actively engaged in, or that I understand, but I'm not really bringing forth into my life? If you would go slowly, one idea at a time, and you would decide to put that into practice, I guarantee in not much time, you would feel like your karma had been lessened a good 25%. And that's a good bit. Now, what's the other 25%? The 25% you have to work through. Well, this is the part where you just live your life and you've done your best and you have to surrender. And eventually you recognize that sometimes things go well, sometimes things don't. Sometimes things go well for a really long time. Sometimes things go very poorly for a very long time. Essentially, the 25% that you have to work out is just letting the momentum exhaust itself, right? Because even if right now you started living exactly in the way that the Kriya Yoga teachers or the authentic enlightenment teachers of your tradition indicate, if you were able to right now just stop doing everything else and live exactly the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita, the principles of the Yoga Sutras, the teachings of Yogananda, the teachings of Roy Eugene Davis, of Sri Yukteswar, if you're able to do that exactly, precisely, well, you would still have difficulties and joys come into your life because there is a momentum from the past that has to exhaust itself, that has to just simply happen. And that's why they say, in some texts, the role of an enlightened person is to practice their meditation technique, learn what they are, abide as their essence, a spirit, figure out how to do that, and then after that, just let the momentum exhaust itself, right? So that's the final 25% that's going to happen one way or the other. But the good news is that as you develop knowledge, this divine knowledge, then that additional 25% doesn't trouble you so much. Because when you develop divine knowledge, you begin to recognize and feel what you are as eternal, infinite spirit. I was just having a conversation with one of the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship students. I think that she's in her second year, but she owns the local yoga studio, and she lives near here. I was having a conversation with her, and we were talking about this and the idea of the definition of Kriya Yoga, which is tapas, svadhyaya, and ishvara pranidhana. Now, ishvara pranidhana is the culmination of the whole process. It's not just pulling the current up through your spine, the meditation technique, and letting it flow down. It's not just doing that. It's going through a series of practices of living in a certain way, of exploring your inner consciousness in a certain way, that what happens is you experience this thing called Ishvara Pranidhana. Now, that is often translated as surrender to God. I heard Yogananda translate it as absorption in Om, or surrender in Om. And that's because Om is the expression of Ishvara. In one of Roy's recent books, he didn't describe it as surrender in God. He was very precise in that he said that Ishvara Pranidhana is letting go of identification with the small sense of self. So the little you that thinks it's a goldfish in a bowl just getting shaken up all the time, but identifying with the wholeness of life, the bigger picture, an expanded state of consciousness. He described it in that way. And oftentimes when people begin practicing Kriya Yoga and reading the Yoga Sutras, and they learn about this definition of Ishvara Pranidhana, they try to force it. They try to dramatize being surrendered to God, by just letting whatever happens happens. Or they bring up a sense of, in a way, it's kind of like false faith, in that it's not real faith. They're just trying to make themselves believe it, but they're not really centered in an inner knowing. And as a student and I were talking, what I tried to describe was that Ishvara Pranidhana happens naturally. It happens after you practice tapas, which is what? Daily, alert, attentive, interested, curious, active meditation. Because when you practice meditation in a way where you are not just trying to relax, you're not just trying to put yourself in a trance, you're not just trying to escape from all the psychological stuff you haven't dealt with. You've done all of that work, or at least a good bit of it. You're able to simply say, I'm going to spend this hour being really interested in what I'm doing, in feeling this current ascending up through the spine. And how can I feel it a little bit more? How can I be a little more sensitive to that movement? Or when you contemplate, what am I as the seer? You're not just doing it in a mechanical way. What am I? What am I? What am I? You're actually observing your consciousness and asking, am I this thought? Well, the thought comes and it goes, so obviously it's not you. Am I this feeling of love and bliss? Well, you didn't have it a half hour ago, so it's not eternal, so that's not you. Am I this deep sense of sadness and depression because something is changing in my life that I don't like? Well, you weren't always that way, so it's not permanent, so that's not you. So you spend that contemplative time really looking in a way like you were having a conversation with someone that you love deeply. Because when you have a conversation with someone that you love deeply, you're not just on autopilot. You're listening to what they're saying, and you're contemplating, then you're responding. There's an aliveness going on there. So tapas is using the techniques that you have and figuring out a way, how can I be more sensitive to the experience of this technique? It's, once your awareness is pulled within from the technique through pratyahara, it's practicing the contemplation, which leads to dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. That's tapas. And when you do that every single day, eventually you start catching glimpses that you are not this small person, this, goldfish in a bowl that keeps getting shaken up all the time. You are actually an infinite field, ocean of spirit. And this is the best words can describe, but you get the idea. And when you start having those glimpses, you're starting to gain real knowledge, which means you're moving from a false faith. And again, sometimes we need that false faith might not be the right word, but sometimes we need that just to kind of keep ourselves going when we get started. But we don't want to rely upon this idea of faith that we don't really quite believe because we've not experienced it, but we keep reaffirming because we're a little bit of a fanatic inside. But what we want to do is, through the practice of tapas and our spiritual practice, to pay attention to those glimpses of, oh, I am the wholeness of life. To try to remember those moments when you recognize and feel that you're not just a personality or a mind or a body, but you are the infinite. And every time that happens through the tapas, then Ishvara Pranidhana starts to develop because you're starting to see the reality of the situation. And svadhyaya, well, that's a topic that sometimes I've described it this way as studying yourself. So we would have done this through our contemplation, but it's also studying available information that your teacher provides, that you've learned through lectures, through books, and so on, because we do need the intellectual understanding, the words, the model of what's going on to help us make sense of the process. So this was another part of the conversation I was having with Angela, was we need to look at the Yoga Sutras. We do need to saturate our mind and our consciousness with the ideas and the qualities and the principles, because that begins to start to organize our field of awareness so that we can perceive that which is greater. So tapas contributes to our ability to understand philosophy, information, useful guidance from a teacher. And then that useful guidance also deepens our tapas, our meditation practice. And when those two things start churning together, you can remember you're already practicing the yamas and niyamas, so you're not making more of a mess of your life. And that's the key. The way that this works is through the practice of the yamas and niyamas, resolving that, we'll say 40 to 50% of your karma, that prevents you from making more of a mess of your life, which gives you more time to focus on being very engaged and direct in the process, interested in the process. And then you get tapas and svadhyaya going, and it just starts churning within you, and your consciousness starts changing. And sometimes it feels great. Sometimes it feels like, what the heck's going on? Just because you're moving through a part of consciousness that you've not really experienced before. So it seems a little disorienting. But it eventually resolves itself, just like when you're learning a new skill. Sometimes you think, what the heck am I even doing? But then once you keep going, you come out the other side and that skill develops. Now, as that begins to incubate your experience, that might be the right word. I think so. Then you start having more and more of an experience of Ishvara Pranidhana, which means you are letting go of your identification with you being a little fish in a bowl getting shaken up all the time. And you're recognizing you are actually everything. You are actually a field of awareness that is just perceiving life through you as a fish for a little while. And you begin to see your life as a temporary flame in a much larger thread of experience. And you begin identifying more with the wholeness of what you are. And then Ishvara Pranidhana is providing divine knowledge to you. And as this divine knowledge develops, all the stuff that causes you problems, that makes you feel small, that makes you feel hopeless, that makes you feel, you name it. There's all kinds of words that we can use. All that stuff becomes less and less impactful. It's said that Ishvara is beyond karma. So the more you begin to have these glimpses of karma, the more you recognize, oh, I am actually beyond karma. And you see the drama of life being played out, but you know you are the actor or the actress and not the character. And just like if you talk to someone who is engaged in a play, when something happened to them in the play, because they have the knowledge that they are the actor, not the character, internally, they are not actually suffering when that thing in their play happens. And this is why divine knowledge, which is learning what you are, or just realizing or recognizing or learning to redirect your awareness back to it, why that is so important is because that provides protection from this insane way of living, of defining yourself through stuff that's impermanent. That's really what it boils down to. We'll go a little bit longer because I do want to make sure that we have time to meditate today together. This is the essence of Kriya Yoga practice, to cultivate that knowledge, which is not book knowledge. Book knowledge helps, but it's not book knowledge. It's knowledge of knowing, of experience. Like as a public speaker, there were times many years ago where I didn't do a very good job speaking, and I was nervous and I had difficulty. It's because I didn't have knowledge of how it was done. But the more I practiced, the more I put myself in that situation, and I started to see, oh, this isn't so bad. I know my material. I'm good at connecting with the audience. I can share the principles. Now, because I have knowledge, that fear that I had, which was a problematic thing, that anxiety that I had isn't bothering me anymore because I have knowledge. So I'm protected from it. So I'm talking about protection. I'm not talking about putting a shield up to keep everything away from you. I'm talking about learning what is true, because when you know what is true, then you are no longer subject to the whims of the mind, to the whims of your moods, to the whims of the culture, to the ideas that come and go. And you are established in a sense of wholeness. And this is the purpose. This is what, for example, Mr. Davis was to me. He was a role model for that. when I was around him, I could feel that. Even though it wasn't a part of our discussion, we didn't sit down and talk about the cosmic processes of manifestation, but there was a sense of that. I was reflecting upon that as I was meditating this morning. I was remembering how much I loved just being in the meditation hall with Mr. Davis. I didn't care what he said. I mean, I was interested, but I was thinking back over my 20s and my 30s, and I remember how much I looked forward to going to Center for Spiritual Awareness, to be with Mr. Davis, and to just simply, he's there, I'm here. There was something about that which was marvelous, as he would say. I think that's a word he used a lot. And I can remember spending time with him just drinking tea, and that same field was there. And I can even feel it now as I talk about it. And when I read his books, again, this is because he is my connection to the lineage and my Kriya Yoga teacher. When I read his books now, it's like I can see line by line the clear message that he had. You know, when you're caught up with your ego and your personality, you can read those things and think, oh, well, you know, that doesn't really jive with, you know, living in the real world. Well, I want you to live in the real world. And so did Mr. Davis, where you read those and you recognize, oh, if I did that, I probably actually would be clearer and happier and more inspired. And that is, he was a embodiment of this knowledge, an embodiment of the experience, an embodiment of what is possible. And we all have that possibility. You have to accept it. One thing I noticed with students, my own students, and also Mr. Davis's students, was that there were some people that had a sense of, yes, I can understand this. Now, there were some people who had a sense of, yes, I can understand this, and they were just egotistical and wanted to be seen as someone who just knew it all. There was that kind of person, sure, but that's everywhere. That's in all kinds of fields. But there were other people who just had a sense of, no, I can know this. I can figure this out. And it was those people who were, you know, humble and sincere that I observed, at least from my experience, that seemed to make the most progress. And there were other people that had the feeling like, I'm just too confused. The best I can do is just get up in the morning and do some breathing exercises. And that was how they felt. And that might be true. And a lot of us experience that, especially early on. But what I would like to encourage you to do, if you feel like you're in that second category, is to stop thinking that way. And Mr. Davis would always say, don't affirm that which you don't want to be true for yourself. It certainly might be that right now you're struggling a little bit, or there is some confusion, or you don't understand the eternal way when you pick it up, or you don't understand the holy science when you read it. Well, it took me 18 years to figure out this book, and I still don't think I'm even an eighth of the way there. But I always had the sense of, I can. It's possible. And what I've noticed that when I brought that up in all areas of my life, positive experiences would come forth. Like I would actually have a glimpse of understanding, or I would experience some kind of positive movement, either mentally, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, and so on. So no matter who you are, where you are on your spiritual path, or what's going on, recognize you're not here to wallow around in confusion or doubt or sorrow. Confusion, doubt, and sorrow are like clouds. They are a reality and they do come and go, but you're not meant to follow that cloud around everywhere. You know, you think it's following you around, but really you're just seeing the cloud and following it around. If you can start to find a way to accept, how can I understand this process and feel I absolutely can. It is possible. Might not get it right now, but it is absolutely possible. If you can at least try to get into that feeling response once or twice a day, eventually it will grow. And if you don't have self-esteem issues, meaning you will actually allow yourself to understand these things, you will find in time that you do start to get it. You do, like I said, 18 years later, pick up the holy science and go, oh my goodness, this that I've been looking at forever, it's just unlocked a whole new world for me. Or you'll pick up Mr. Davis's The Eternal Way, We didn't actually get to it, so we'll save that for the next time. And you'll read some of these paragraphs that he has written, which are just so jam packed with uh, knowledge and wisdom that you'll start to say, "Oh, I get what he's saying here." So if you don't have knowledge and you feel that it's difficult having knowledge, the first step is to begin to feel that it is possible for you to understand and to make positive changes and to grow. And if you are engaging in the yamas and niyamas, if you're doing your best to uh, engage your meditation practice in a dynamic way every day, um, and you're living the best life you know how, and you cut yourself some slack every now and then because you're not going to be perfect. As the months and years go by, and sometimes it happens very quickly. I've seen numerous students who have made great progress in a short amount of time by following what they've been recommended. Then divine knowledge develops, wisdom develops. And through that wisdom, there is a sense of understanding, a sense of rightness in the universe. And then, in a way, that idea of protection develops again, not trying to keep enemies away, but in a way that you're protected because you are no longer subject to be influenced by the anxiety, the depression. You're not following around that cloud anymore. You're letting it go. You're moving into a clearer state. And that is the whole purpose of us having a human organism, a body with the chakras and the nervous system that we do, is to actually make as much progress in this life as we can. A lot of people just dick around. They go from one thing to the next. They're just caught up in that. They're caught up in this, and they don't make any progress. That's okay. They've got another lifetime. But the purpose of our life as Kriya yogis is to acknowledge it's not always going to be easy. Sometimes we are going to be fundamentally challenged at an emotional, mental, spiritual level. But that challenge is not an enemy. It's an obstacle to resolve. It's something to gain knowledge about, because once you come up against these things which you feel are difficult, and you look around them and you understand them and you get help, and you engage the process, eventually you rise above them. Not in a way that there's like a hierarchy and you're getting better. It's just that you get a bigger perspective, in that when you were 18 years old and you couldn't figure out how to pay your rent, well, now you're in your 60s and you can pay for the rent for all your grandkids. It's just so easy for you because you've gone through the process and you've learned and you have grown. I don't recommend paying rent for your grandkids. You should encourage them to be self-sufficient, strong, happy, functional people. But I think you get the idea. I don't encourage you paying the rent for your kids either, but that's just me. Of course, there's always situations where you might need to help out, but you understand, hopefully, where I'm coming from. Anyway, so this is the idea of divine knowledge that we want to cultivate. And you are already doing it by being here. You are already doing it by engaging your meditation practice. You are already doing it by studying the material that you have available to you, by being with people that are supportive of this process. So know that it is already happening. And that's an important thing. If you admit and you know that it's already happening, you will actually notice more progress. It's like, for most of my life, I've been a health conscious person. And of course, when you are a health conscious person, you tend to be very fixated on, well, am I doing it right? Am I doing enough? Did I take that right herb? Am I eating this? There's a way you can get over fixated on it. And what I found is, throughout my life in that situation, what helps is stop and spend about a month journaling. What do you eat every day? How do you sleep? How much do you meditate? How much do you exercise? And every single time I would do that, I would look at it and say, oh, I actually am doing all right. And that shifted my consciousness in such a way that it allowed me to grow a little bit better, or a little bit clearer, I suppose. The same thing can be true for your spiritual practice. Don't beat yourself up. Just stop and take about a few weeks or a month and journal. Well, do you meditate every day? Do you read literature every day? Do you participate in times like this when we can get together? Do you try to live in accordance with the yamas and niyamas? And this is why in the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship program, I make them journal for this reason. Because if you can look back and see that, even if you aren't perfect, even if you aren't where you want to be, you'll see, oh, I'm actually doing pretty well. And for something happens that in a way helps to expand your consciousness just by acknowledging that. So you have to acknowledge that you are doing some good stuff for yourself. That can make a huge difference in what you perceive as to be your capacity to make progress with health, with spirituality, with achieving a goal, all those things. Really looking at what you are doing and acknowledging, I'm doing a lot, and accepting that as something good and wholesome and uplifting for you. So, with that said, let's go ahead and meditate together for about 25 minutes or so.